Thank you for the introduction. So I'll continue with more PRISMAP related topics and at the end we have time for some more in-depth discussion. So I will present what we did in what was our work package 4, which was named harmonization and standardization in the way of using novel radionuclides for, at the end, the radiopharmaceutical preparations. So why, or what was the starting point is, of course, that the radiopharmaceuticals we make out of our radionuclides are considered medicinal products or drugs, which would be the US term for that. And it doesn't matter whether we want to treat patients or whether we want to diagnose patients. The only exemption is if we have sealed sources, then regulatory-wise, it would be a medical device. So when we do that, and I've shown that a number of times, also that was a little bit our starting point when we develop novel radiopharmaceuticals, also from our novel PRISMAP radionuclides. We start from radionuclide production, we make some chemistry, we develop a new compound, we characterize it in vitro, in vivo, and then we go more pharmaceutical, make formulations, and then plan a clinical trial and use it in patients. Finally, to go maybe to all the phases of the clinical trial, standardized product. In this development process, we need to generate data on the quality of the product, which is then the basis of the efficacy of the product. But in particular, in the early phases, we also need to look, is our product safe? And that's how the regulatory people look at the data we are generating. And that was kind of the starting point of our work package 4 to help at the end users to bring the novel radionuclides to patients in ideally controlled clinical trials, which are, of course, heavily regulated. We said that we first want to see what these standards are and whether there are common standards and is there a need to harmonize them. Then with, of course, the aim to help users of PRISMAP to think of clinical translation and also to provide more specific standardized quality and safety data for our radionuclides. So that was the starting point, and I would now, during the rest of my time, a little bit show you how we went from the beginning to get harmonized and standardized with our radionuclides. Thinking at the beginning this would be an easy way, and it would be the project would run very smoothly, straight and smooth, but realizing that there are maybe some bumps in between. So the first thing we did, almost the first thing we did, was to organize a workshop. Unfortunately, in COVID times, it was organizing a workshop. I remember long discussions whether we can do this in person or not. Finally, it was everything again online in early 2022, and you see the people that were participating. I actually a little bit forgot myself how many people we involved at that time already. Besides a lot of experts who are also in the room today. Overseas experts, Serge was already there, but from the US, from industry, from international organization, and also regulatory experts to see where we are, what is the status in relation to regulations, and is there already a standardized way to deal with regulatory requirements for radionuclides? So we had to also deliver the outcome of this workshop, which you can find as our deliverable, where we reviewed the quality, the status of how quality is regulated, and quality in the pharmaceutical sense is not only the quality control as such, but also the process itself. And then also what is there in relation to, especially for the development, non-clinical safety data and pharmacology. If you bring it to, I don't want to bore you with too many details, but it already became clear that there were some discussion on certain topics, how to involve in GMP, and for example, in relation to quality, some, let's say, recommendations were not finalized. So a number of open questions also out of this deliverable. And okay, trying to go in more detail, we then were also realized that some of these regulations may also change during the period we were working in. One event was that the whole regulatory framework in the EU was being revised with the revision of the pharmaceutical directive. And in early 2023, the European Union, the Commission released a proposal for the revision of the pharmaceutical regulation, which also included points touching radionuclides that you may want to use for radiopharmaceutical preparations. And this was the time that you were able to bring in comments. So we involved together with other entities, and also coming back to that, to raise, let's say, the voice of what is needed in terms of novel radionuclides, which starts with definitions. Then also one topic is there a need for marketing authorization of radionuclides? And then also a specific topic is the relation between pharmaceutical regulation and radiation safety regulations, which is the BSSD, the Basic Safety Standards Directive. So we made some proposals, and you can see, I will not go into detail with that, also aligning that with proposals that were made, for example, by the ENM, but also by the industrial players, the NMEU, which were first taken up by the Parliament. It's a complex process, but at the end of the day, most things remained as they are. So the current status, and it also a little bit shows how long-lasting that process is. This was in 2023. The directive is still not finalized, so it's now within the council, in the hands of the council, which represents the member states of the European Union. There is, say, a small hope that certain things may be recognized regulatory-wise. That was also, I mean, partly maybe related also to our activities, but finally a proposal from Germany to allow individual member states to exempt radionuclides to be provided without having a marketing authorization. So that's in the current proposal, but I do not want to predict the outcome if it remains or not. Yeah. At the same time, and Sarah also mentioned that the IEA also realized on a global level that the regulations are one of the main challenges their members face when it comes to the use of especially novel radiopharmaceuticals, including those with let's say, PRISMAP radionuclides. And well, we also included our voice in this meeting, and a position paper was published on that is mentioned here. However, one of the main targets to communicate the needs was the European Medicines Agency, which is responsible for, let's say, guiding the process of clinical translation of medicines in general. So we actually had already a meeting at the very start of the project, which then resulted in participation of EMA members in the workshop. EMA revised a number of guidelines and sent the concept papers. That the first thing they do, again, the concept paper should result in a draft proposal by the EMA. So those guidelines we commented on have still not reached the draft proposal state. So it's always a long-lasting process. And also at that time, the EMA initiated not only, or certainly not for radiopharmaceuticals or radionuclides, or they realized that there are a number of different new medicines, ATMPs, those cell-based therapies, gene therapies, where let's say the classical regulatory system does not work very well. So they introduced a number of measures to deal with that. And one is what they call the Innovation Task Force meetings. And we attempted to use this tool to, let's say, communicate the issues related to the use of novel radionuclides. And we were successful in this, and that has a very specific format. You have to formulate specific questions, there is an official meeting report of that, and there were a number of regulators present, including those responsible for the inspections and the good manufacturing practices, which then asked us for a specific statement on the GMP. So we asked them, is there a need for marketing authorization? Does a radionuclide need to have GMP? Which caused a lot of discussions, even among the regulators. We asked them about quality requirements in terms of radionuclide, radiochemical purity, when it comes, for example, to radionuclides with complex decay chains like actinium, and also what the issues related to measuring the radionuclides through this development chain. So we got certain answers to that, but not one thing that was identified was the people who are responsible for GMP, that they say, okay, we probably need to revise or need to include some considerations of novel radionuclides when we will renew our documents, which is in Europe, the Annex 3. Again, they have aimed at releasing the Annex 3 at the end of next year, but they have not yet published a new draft that you then would be able to comment on. So we are still waiting for that, and of course are a little bit prepared to have our say in that. If a little bit more, and we can also a little bit discuss that later, is do you really need GMP when you prepare your radionuclide or not? Complicated question, which we also tried a little bit to address them with specific radionuclides, and that's the second part of our work, going a little bit more specific into PRISMAP's radionuclide that were most requested. One was terbium-161, was mentioned already. It was which was the radionuclide most requested within the PRISMAP portfolio. And in the deliverable I mentioned before, we go a little bit trying to at least show how certain things can be addressed, and one is related to production of terbium-161 radiopharmaceuticals. We got this example from how this is done at the PSI, where you see here the process of at the end making the radiopharmaceutical with the focus on the radionuclide production, where you see certain parts are under full GMP control, whereas other steps in the process are out of GMP, well controlled, a little bit reflecting what we had also discussed in these meetings with the EMA. And you will also find some quality data in this deliverable on batches of terbium produced for users at PRISMAP in terms of radionuclidic, radiochemical purity, but also in terms of metal contents. Similar to with copper-64, again, we will be showing this deliverable process done at the DTU, how they make their copper-64 complying with, in certain parts, fully with GMP requirements, in some parts simply due to local facility considerations, being out of GMP, for example, in relation to target preparation and radionuclide separation processes. But those then are included the same way as shown for the terbium, the radionuclide then included as a starting material into the GMP compliant radiopharmaceutical production process. We try to compare different qualities of copper-64 produced by different PRISMAP facilities, and also you will find the outcome in our deliverable with, in particular, measurements of metals and apparent molar activity of the radionuclides produced. I will not go much into detail, which also helps in supporting developments that other players in the regulatory field are doing, and one is the EDQM that is responsible for the European Pharmacopoeia, that has in the list of work at the moment also a monograph on copper-64 for solution for radiolabeling, and a chapter on actinium-225 for radiolabeling. And here the data that were also produced during the work of PRISMAP will help to hopefully speed up this also quite lengthy process. In terms of say safety data, I mean, one activity I want to mention is the activity done by specifically Christoph Bethe in Leuven, who initiated what we call nuclear medicine equipment standardization study, showing or with the example of terbium-161, the importance to also in the clinical setting when you develop with a clinical trial and a clinical translation, to be able to trace the radioactivity back to at the end primary standards, but doing that also for the equipment that is needed in the clinical setting, like gamma cameras, activimeters, gamma counters, and he did a nice study that was presented at the ENM a month ago. And again, I will not go into detail. And as another example, what we did in relation to safety is looking at the actual safety data that are available for actinium-225, quite an interesting exercise, where you here see kind of the summary of in total here the number of patients. So the main applications of actinium that you can find is of course PSMA treatments. I'm coming to them. If you want to know more about that, we just published that. There's also one outcome of our work package 4. We are not alone. There are a number of other, let's say, players and projects that realize that the this standardization and harmonization or dealing with the regulatory environment that we are in is of importance. And I just mentioned some, and we, of course, there is a close connection also of PRISMAP members with many projects here that I think at the end also helped to raise the awareness and also communicating that at different levels. We mentioned the EMA, I mentioned IEA, we involved with ENM. But again, all this work also, we realized we could not tackle a number of other problems, and that's, we are not at the end. So with the potential continuation of the project, we have identified a number of other issues that we want, hopefully will be able to tackle on the rest of the road that is expected to have certain bumps as well. With that, I thank you for your attention, and I would like to thank all of the PRISMAP members that were heavily engaged in all our work package 4 meetings and helping deliverables to be written and so on and so on. Thank you. Yeah.